I'm Christy Lathrop, and I'm an 8th grade science teacher in Castle Rock, Colorado. This is a lesson that I created for my students as we were investigating matter. This lesson is about the density of irregular objects. You'll see throughout this lesson that I don't just use the SMARTboard as a presentation tool. Rather, it's a way to engage the students. It's a hub for visible thinking, as well as for collaboration, and a way for students to connect their learning with the outside world. In this lesson, my objectives are for the students to find the volume of irregular objects, to calculate the density of irregular objects, to investigate why objects float or sink, as well as to prepare for the human density lab, which is a lab that we do shortly after this. And so, let's go. The first thing I do with my students in every lesson is a review. And so, I ask for them to define these words. I'll give them some time to work in their groups and to find the definitions. I usually give them about a minute to 30 seconds because this is from a lesson just before this one. And so, right at the end of the time, when the students are finished working, I will go to the random name chooser and I will select 3 students to share their answers. And so here I'll just select a couple for the sake of time. We'll go back to that page, and then this happens to be a reveal. And so a student will share what they think the definition of mass is. Once they've done that, I'll have them check it. So they'll come up here, they'll drag mass, the star of mass, down to match the other star, and the definition will appear here in this blue box. This is an opportunity for them to check their work. From here, I'll move on, and I'll pose this question to them. So, you get in a bathtub full of water, what happens? We'll take some time, we'll think about it, we'll discuss it, the students will give me some answers. And then, of course, when you get in a bathtub full of water, the water that spills is displaced, and so this is revealed in a way that's engaging to the students. Which brings us to the law of displacement. This is one of the situations where the students will write down notes, and so I'll erase to reveal the definition. And the students will record those notes. From there, I have a question for them to reflect on. Why is it that we would use the law of displacement for measuring volume instead of using the traditional formula? I'll give the students some time to think. I'll say you've got about 30 seconds to talk it over with your group. We'll go back to the random name chooser. And I'll have a couple students respond. They'll write their answers up here on the SMARTboard. And so those students might think that because some objects have uneven shapes. And so, let's move on. Let's have a chance to check to see if we really understand what irregular objects are. So which of these objects might we measure volume using the displacement method? Again, the students have an opportunity to discuss the answers with their groups. Again, we'll go to the random name chooser and select those students. And then those students will call on that small group of students. They'll come up here to the board and they'll say, okay, well, I think a ball is something that we'd use using the displacement method, that we'd measure using the displacement method. They click it and they find, no, that one's not correct. So instead, they go up to a box. Again, not correct. So then they try a kitty, and they find, yes, a kitty is something we measure using the displacement method. This is the point in the class where the students would complete a mini lab. And so I would leave these directions up on the board. They would go and get their materials. They'd complete the lab. As we're getting close to the end of the lab, they will record their results, their data, into this data table. As we're looking at our data, we'll notice that sometimes we end up with an outlier, which is, actually I love it when we end up with the outlier because it gives us an opportunity to talk about that. And so I'll come up here, I'll grab my highlighter, I'll highlight that one. We will notice that there's an outlier data point, outlying data point, and I'll say, okay, we're going to come back to that. And then from there, we'll go outside of Notebook to a website for them to be able to continue their investigation. This is accompanied by a lab sheet, which I have linked to our Notebook file. And the website takes them to the simulation that's online. And so the students are able to practice finding density. And so they put an object into the graduated cylinder, they move the object to the scale, the graduated cylinder tells them the volume, the scale gives them the mass, they calculate the density, they place the object into the water or liquid, and they find that it sinks. They continue this with a few more objects the entire process until we've got a number of different objects that are here in the liquid. Inevitably, some students will notice that there's a bar here at the bottom where they can change the density of the liquid. And so we'll do that. And they'll discover that as we change the density of liquid, as the density of liquid increases, some of the objects float differently than they did before, or they sink differently than they did before. And so the students begin to identify that there's a relationship between the density of a liquid, the density of a material, and whether it floats or sinks when it's in the liquid. So we go back to our Notebook file. From here, I tell the students, okay, remember we had that outline data point. We go back to data, and we're able to go back and talk about the clay in the water and how most of this data supports that clay is denser than water. Then we have one outlier here that is 0.87. So we talk about why we know that there must be some kind of a mathematical error when this was the same clay that everybody else used. Finally, the wrap-up that I complete with this, I use a number of different methods for wrap-up. Oftentimes I'll use clickers. On this particular lesson, we used Vocaroo. And so I asked all the students to think about what they learned today and why it might be important. Give them some time to reflect. I'll choose a few more students using the random name chooser. We'll go back to the wrap-up. I'll choose about 3 students to complete this. And those students will come up to the board. Actually, they'll go up to the computer where I've got a headset with a microphone set up. And the students will then record just a short reflection on what they learned today. From there, they can email it to me. I receive it on my email, and I have an opportunity to go back and evaluate what the students learned that day. I really appreciate you considering me for the SMART Exemplary Educator program. Please contact me with any further questions that you might have. Thanks.